The issue with the wage growth portion of the triple lock is that natural wage growth isn't really materialising. A large portion of that wage growth that forms that statistic is from those national minimum wage rises. So there's kind of a knock-on effects with all these different policies interacting with each other, and that the national minimum wage increases wage growth, which looks good on paper, but if everyone else's wage growth isn't going up, it kind of doesn't really sort of stand the test of that statistic.
Keeping businesses thriving, compliance and safe, forecasting strategy, it's all on our mind. It's time payroll took its place in the boardroom to shine.
Everybody, and welcome back to Payroll Question Time. It's great to be back after a good summer holiday. I hope everyone who's joining us had a chance to take a little break over August, as well as we did here on the PQT panel. Hope you got that well-deserved break. We know there's a lot of burnout in the payroll industry, and it's really important. So please do make sure you take that time to have a holiday if you haven't already. Book it in before Christmas. Now, look, a lot has happened since we last met together in July. In fact, we've released 2 podcasts, one with 2 of our panel members, Richard George and Karen Thompson, which I'll put some links in the show notes for that later. Lots has happened in the world of payroll as well. As Ferris Bueller, I'll misquote him quickly and say, payroll moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it, which is why we have a wonderful panel here today that's going to help guide you through the things that have been happening since we last met. Now, of course, we have also had an announcement as to when the next budget is going to take place. So for those interested in that, we'll get to that as well at the start of today's show. But most importantly, if you have payroll questions that have emerged over the last 6 to 8 weeks and you really want our panel to answer those questions, this is your opportunity to do so. Put those questions in the questions box, and I will do my very best to ask our wonderful panel, if you have in front of us, in real time for their thoughts on those questions. Those questions do not need to be related to the topic we're discussing. It can help, but it doesn't matter if it's not. We'll still make sure we get to those. And if I don't get to them immediately, be patient. I'll make sure I get through every single one before the end of the show. We will also be running a poll today. It'd be great to get your views on the question that's important to us, so we can comment on those results as well. So please do get your fingers at the buzzers when that happens. And we are, of course, recording this session, so you don't need to be busy scribbling notes. You will receive a recording of today's episode later on, along with the slide deck. Finally, and this is probably the most important bit, your opportunity to let us know what you want us to talk about in a future edition of PQT. So if you have a particular subject, benefits, a reward, payroll, pensions, whatever it is that's really keeping you up at night and we've never tackled it, or maybe we have tackled it before and you missed the episode, let us know, because that's our opportunity to bring that into the next edition of PQT. Right, before we jump into the content, I'm going to read a quick disclaimer to you all, and that is this: the presentation does not provide definitive answers to individual queries, and in some places takes views on matters which are uncertain. It is not intended to be relied upon in any specific context or as a substitute for seeking advice, legal or otherwise, on a specific circumstance, as each case may be different. Right, without further ado, let me introduce you to today's wonderful panel. You'll see some familiar faces. My name is Nick Day. Before we start, I'm the host of today's show. I'm also the host of the Payroll podcast. I was very lucky to be the 2024 Global Vision Award winner for Payroll. I've been in this industry now for 22, going on to 23 years. Love it. It's my industry. I'm passionate about it. I can't wait to see what the future has in store for all of us. And yet I still feel like very much an infant in the world of payroll against our wonderful panel. So let me introduce you to our first panel member, which is Simon Parsons.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you again. Simon Parsons, Director of Compliance Strategies at SD Worx. I also chair the BCS Payroll Specialist Group. Irene, I sit on a number of HMRC committees and groups. And I'm no longer part of Reward 300. It appears I'm now Partner 50, which is a new category that's come in from Reward Strategy. So they now have a new Partner 50 group, which I'm now part of. And one of this year's rewards judges as well.
Fantastic, I love that. And moving to my right, Karen Thompson.
Good afternoon, everybody. If you see me sniffling away, apologies, I've had a sneezing fit. I'm Karen Thompson. My day job is partner and head of payroll service at Armstrong Watson. Like Simon, I sit on a number of HMRC panels, including Admin Burdens Advisory Board. I too am part of the now Reward 50, and very proud of it. And I think I've got to say my most recent, I'm going to say claim to fame, was being invited by Nick to do one of his podcasts, which turned out out to be thoroughly enjoyable because I forgot I was doing one. So Nick succeeded extremely well. So thank you, Nick.
Glad to hear. If anyone's interested in how or what it feels like to become a payroll partner, or if you want to find out how to become partner within your firm, then go and check out that episode. I will put a link in the notes in a little moment. Over to my right again, of course, Matthew Ickwig.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Matthew. I work for the CIPP as Policy and Research Officer. CIPP is here to help and represent the entire payroll industry. So whether that's training, education, consultancy, there's something we can help you out with. But my job is Policy and Research Officer, so I'm here to sort of help represent the payroll professional on those government forums alongside Simon and Karen, making sure that we all get our voices heard with government changes to legislation, and anything that they're sort of planning in the future. And I suppose if Nick's the infant here, I think that makes me the newborn, although I think I do have now double figures of payroll world experience. I've been in the industry about 11 years now, so I'm getting up there.
So we're in good company. A couple of panel members can't quite make it today due to missed flights and other reasons, but we've still got a lot of expertise on our panel. Some of the topics we're going to be discussing today include the SD Worx HR and Payroll Pulse Report 2025. The November budget, of course, which Social Reads has confirmed will be on the 26th of November, tax advice market, student loans, and any other business and further questions. So please do fill up my question box so I can go through those and make sure we make this session as valuable as possible. And of course, it is conference season we're going into at the moment. There's going to be lots of reports, lots of studies, lots of things starting to come out. I think CIPP have been running a report as well. SD Worx have just released this Pulse report. We've got conferences coming up where we're going to hear some really good speakers as well. So it's a really good time to get back in tune with what the industry is thinking and the pulse of the market. So let's have a look at this SD Worx Pulse report. This is something you can download, and I will put a link in the notes in just a moment of where you can get access to this report. But some headlines for those that may be listening to this later on in audio format. This is from a report that surveyed 16,000 employees and 5,625 HR leaders across Europe and the UK. It covers key challenges for employers in 2025, including talent, payroll, and AI, sustainable HR, and trust transparency. And actually within that report, I know it's got an HR element to it as well, but it reveals the top 5 payroll challenges for employers. It covers things like accuracy and timeliness, self-service access, transparency, payroll's role in financial well-being, which I know is a really hot topic at the moment. And of course, it's links from financial wellness into mental health as well, which I think is a really important and growing. It's growing in importance because we have a real impact on financial health and mental health as well. So I think that's a really interesting element to take a look at. And there's some elements in there as well regarding fair pay and compliance and how we link payroll to ESG goals. So if some of this sounds interesting and exciting, please do go and download that report. As I mentioned, keep an eye on the conversation to your left, and I'll drop a note in there, the download link to that report. It's very, very thorough, and probably the most thorough I've seen recently in relation to what's happening in this space. So that's where I wanted to start. Before we jump into the November budget, which I know we're going to get some questions on, I actually want to run a little bit of a poll, if that's okay, with our audience. I want to find out what your top payroll challenge is in 2025. So there are a couple of options we're going to run for you here. One is reducing payroll costs or processing costs, improving employee experience, ensuring accuracy in dealing with errors, ensuring payroll speed, or managing payroll data securely. And I think this is quite challenging to sometimes select just one of these. So I'll be interested to see the results. When those results do come in, we will of course get our panel to report on those. While we're waiting for all of you to think carefully about which decision you want to make and which answer you want to go for, we've had a couple of questions. So the first question that's come in, welcome back to the panel. Welcome back to you too, Carrie. She says, can we have views on HMRC changing the fuel rates for electric cars for home charging and charging at a charge station? I'm confused on what to do. So if we go in the same order as our introductions, I'll come to you, Simon, first.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, and thanks for the question. This is certainly one that hits some topics, and we have actually heard from HMRC representatives in meetings on the policy. So their view is a bit, well, these are my words, a little bit blasé, because this is an easement. But for some time, they've been concerned that the fact of charging at home and charging on the street has differentials in price. And so they first published the rates on the, from memory, 12th of, no, it was 22nd of August. And then I think they published them 2 days later with the revised and the split. So it is an extra easement to allow employers to pay employees a higher rate for business mileage charging for those who've charged on public charging points, which charge a higher amount of money, etc., for reimbursement. Now, in some ways, that's good news. It's good that those with EV vehicles are able to claim back more and cover more the costs, because I think it was ending up, now that we've got a position of company car tax rates increasing on EVs, now at 3%, it's going to rise to 4% and then 5%, that there are associated costs. So it was actually costing more to have an EV maybe than you were getting back from your employer for charging it. So there is that concession. I've got to say, we have met with policy people about this. In fact, it was last week. I'll try and say what I can say. And also, being the chair of the BCS Payroll Specialist Group, we contacted the software development support team the day after announcement to say, hey, what's going on? Why weren't these pre-warned? To which the response from the SDST was, what rates have changed? So they weren't aware. But anyway, you can see that HMRC is quite a big government department, lots of different areas. They have been considering for some time an easement to make it better for those driving EV vehicles who have to charge on the public street. And they just announced it days before the 1st of September. Now, I guess in defense to them, they'll say you don't have to apply them. It's an easement, because the challenge in software was, why aren't you ready? Why didn't you know? How on earth do we do this? Do we have to get receipts? Do we do this? Do we do that? Do we do the other? And the answer is, we don't really know. And I think at this point, we still don't really know. And I'd be interested in some of the other panelists' views. I think Karen's on the same groups as I am. But there was an element of actually, were they that bothered? I think there was an element of employers put in reasonable process for having the evidence you need. And if you want to apply the higher rate for public street charging, do so. How you police that between home and out on the street, I don't know. How you judge what mileage was covered from their home charge for business v private, I don't know. And I'm not sure they did either, if I'm honest about the discussion that went on. But in some ways, I do see it as a positive thing that actually there is that type of concession. Now, the important aspect for an employer, of course, is you need to keep some sort of suitable records. What that is a bit undefined. It's not defined. So there's an element of do your best at this stage in time.
Super. Okay, Simon said, Karen, you might have some thoughts on that as well. Anything you want to add?
I'm very much, I was on the same discussion as Simon's just mentioned. And I think the actual easement itself and thinking, oh, we should do something, should be commended. The timing and the lack of consultation is the bit that shouldn't, for the reasons, one of them being the software Simon outlined. But one of the examples sort of I put forward was, it is good it's an easement and it's recognising, let's call it the real world, because we are quite often critical of government departments for not being in the real world. So good there. But it was, okay, how do we, and if we take even just us as an employer, not even as an agent, where we have EV cars and company cars and what have you, it's like, well, they charge at home. You can only go so far on a charge. You then charge publicly, and then you maybe go somewhere else and you charge publicly, and then you come home and you've now got your free energy overnight for an hour, whatever it is, and you charge at home. What part of the mileage is home? What part was public? And as Simon says, yeah, it was, again, our words of, well, we're not making you do this. We're just giving you an easement that you've got an option to do this. And it's like, yeah, but you're forgetting who your audience is. We're used to you saying, you can't do this, but you can do this, or rather, unless it says you can't, it means you usually can, is another way of doing it. So this is the problem. For us, it's become grey, and we don't like grey areas. So I think for employers, the danger you've got is your employees, if they see this, because don't forget, it's normally the employer that points this out in policy with, here's the new advisory rates. I know our HR team did it here, and I thought, did you actually read what I put? There's a difference here. So the question is going to be asked about the EV, which rate do I claim? Because this again could be a cost on business. I'm not saying business shouldn't reimburse appropriately and accordingly, but it is going to be yet another cost because the rates have gone up. So how you police it and what your travel policy looks like, I think you need to look at your travel policy. My interpretation of HMRC is, well, as long as it's fair, it's reasonable, we're probably not going to do a deep dive looking at it, but yeah, do. So I'm afraid we can't give you concrete, do it like this or like that, because it would depend on your company, your business, and to be fair, how many EV cars you've got, probably.
I can make some suggestions if you want, Nick, but there's an element of, and you think this is just the thoughts of Simon, there's an element of, if you've got a receipt for a public street charging amount of money, divide that by the business miles you done, see if it covers it, then claim on that basis, and the rest is somewhere else. Don't know, but I'm not saying that that's right. I'm just saying that's how my cynical mind works at times, is, well, all right, you've got a receipt, divide your business miles into the on-street or the public charging value. Does it cover it? If it's more than that, then you've got to go to home. But Karen may have a different view because she knows that I'm just cynical at times.
Yeah.
Again, it depends on your employees, the type of travel policies you've got in place.
Yeah.
The behaviour, culture of your workforce, again, without insulting anybody. As I was cynical, you'll get those who will probably, like me, who would only claim home because I'd be too frightened to claim public, thinking, oh my goodness, how many miles did I do? But you'll have the opposite, as Simon's just described. So that's why I think you are going to have to review your travel policy, whatever that is. But as HMRC said, you don't have to introduce it.
No, the other factor of consideration, we could do a whole section on EV vehicles, maybe we should sometime. The other factor of EV vehicles is lots of these schemes, salary sacrifice, that are operated by employers. And I've had 3 employers recently that have told me we don't operate company cars. They're EV salary sacrifice schemes. The EV salary sacrifice scheme is a company car provision. There's no question about it. They are providing company car. However, sometimes there may be a view that you can claim back 45p because it's my own car. You can't. You're bound by these EV charging rates for business travel. So although they may be perceived that they're paying for their own lease through salary sacrifice, they can't claim back 45p or the other rates for etc. It's an element if you're limited by these rates.
Good. Well, what a great opening question. Please give us more of those. That's, as you say, we're finding some really good and important conversation topics with a little bit of debate and difference of opinion as well. Before we get the poll results, I'm going to ask those in just a moment. Just wanted to remind people, I think I may have just gone a little bit too fast on the SD Worx HR and Payroll Pulse. I've had some additional stats on this, just that you know, it covers 16 European countries. And it was published by the SD Worx Research Institute, which is the largest research project of its kind in Europe. And the goal of that project was to help payroll leaders like you watching the show, and HR leaders, of course, to understand what people really want from work and what other employers are doing to keep up. Someone put a question in the box to say, where is the report? I've now dropped it into the chat, so if you can't access that, please do let me know. I say that because I've got one comment that's just come in saying, I'm having an issue. I'm just seeing that the webinar, just getting a sign saying the webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. If anyone else is getting that message, please let me know. We'll try and investigate that, but hopefully you can find that in the chat. Right, really excited on this poll. I think it's a poll that I'm genuinely really intrigued to see what the results are going to be. I thought they might be split. It looks like that they are. And truth be told, the highest scoring result, which is dealing with errors, 51%, I probably didn't anticipate being the highest scoring, but I see payroll from a slightly different lens. So those of you on this webinar that I'm sure are in the detail and processing and doing all those things. So Simon, Karen, and Matthew, would love to get your thoughts. I'll start with you, Matthew, because I know that I've come to Simon for the EV question. What are your thoughts on those results?
Yeah, no worries, thank you. I think the thing that strikes me about all of these different items is that really they could come under the one heading, and it's to sort of make sure that you get your procurement right. A lot of these things can be sorted by properly acquiring the right software to help you with your specific scenarios. And one of the things that we sort of hear over and over again is that either payroll professionals don't get invited into those initial conversations, that can be sort of left with HR and finance professionals. So make sure you're always getting in on those conversations. And also that people don't allow themselves enough time to properly transition, and that can have long-term impacts on employee experience, the accuracy that you're dealing with. So really make sure that when you are exploring changing payroll software or payroll and HR software, that you put the time and effort into finding the right solutions for you in the first place, because that will really set you up with a solid foundation for tackling these issues further down the line. And I suppose it'd be remiss of me not to mention that obviously ensuring accuracy and dealing with payroll errors, you're going to need a really good, strong focus on training and education there. And I'm sure Richard would be saying the same if he was here. So make sure that you've got a team that knows what they're doing, keeps up to date with all their CPD, and is always learning about those new interesting things happening in the world of payroll.
Absolutely, that's what keeps this show alive. For those actually who are watching this later in audio only, the results are reducing processing costs was 11%, improving employee experience 17%, ensuring accuracy in dealing with errors 51%, ensuring payroll speed 10%, managing data securely 10%. So a real mix here. I wonder, I think everything Matthew said is absolutely accurate and correct. However, I wonder as well if one of the reasons we're focusing on this score is so high on accuracy dealing with errors at 51% is because right now payroll have got so many things, so many plates they need to spin. You know, we're trying to, sometimes it's easy to take our eye off what is the most important thing. We're trying to manage employee experience. We're trying to implement earned wage access. We're trying to reduce our costs. We're trying to get investment for better technology. We're trying to make sure all of this data in this AI-driven world is secure. And sometimes with all of those plates spinning at the same time, it can be really hard to focus on what's fundamentally the most important thing within payroll, which is an accurate, timely, and compliant payroll function. What are your views on that, Karen? You've obviously posting payrolls for a number of clients. So do these results track what you would have expected, or are you a little bit surprised by them like I was? What are your thoughts?
I think surprised or not surprised in the fact that obviously we all want accuracy, and ideally we don't want errors, but when we do have errors, it's obviously really important to deal with them quickly and, you know, without blame, and, you know, and just get the resolution. And particularly obviously where your agent, so things like reducing processing costs, for example, that's, you know, I would suggest is going to be more prevalent to an agent in particular. So if I take myself, and I'm sure Simon would agree with this, is whilst we've got increasing employment costs, just like employers have with their staffing costs, what have you, so have agents. So you can only charge so much for any service, whether it's payroll or anything else. So you've got to look at reducing those costs so that you don't have to pass on some of the other costs that are out with your control. But when you're looking at doing that, obviously you need to keep your employees on board and that experience and keeping them trained, as Matthew's just said. But that in itself, you're then dealing with, well, change management comes into the mix here, because if you're trying to do things to make it reduce your costs or increase the speed of processing, all of this comes with change. But also at the same time, of course, as Matthew's alluded to, you're then getting into, well, how do you do all this whilst maintaining accuracy? And then when you come to that last one, which I'm glad at least has got 10% of managing payroll data securely, it's sort of like a given that, you know, GDPR, all those things, but it's bigger than that now. It is in this cyber security world where you're trying to ensure, you know, perhaps that, you know, clients and or employees self-serve. Well, you've got to make that accessible, but at the same time you've got to make it accessible but still secure, so that I call them the naughty people don't get access to your systems as well, and, you know, take the data that they shouldn't take and do the ransom check, as we're seeing in the press. It seems to be week by week something. So I can see why, while it's a given, why it's also a challenge as far as accuracy and errors, because you've got all this other stuff going on in the background, and all of it is crucial and important. So I can see why that would be a key focus.
So let me come to you, Simon, because there's something else I'm seeing in these results. Well, let's jump back to the panel as well, if we can, just so people can see what's going on. But I think one thing I find really, really interesting here is there's loads and loads of social content. So I'm coming to you for this one, Simon, about how payroll needs to be seen at the C-suite. We need to be more strategic. Should there be a chief payroll officer? And I'm not saying none of those things shouldn't happen, but I think it shows that as well, if it's really hard to lift our head up and be strategic when we've got to make sure fundamentally that we're also managing the transactional, the accuracy, the errors, the things that really need to are so important, because if we don't get that bit right, you can't get the employee experience right. You know, people's financial wellness and health will suffer if we're not paying them correctly and on time. And I think sometimes we don't want quicker speed in return for more errors, so that has to come second. So when you look at it with a different lens, these results make sense. But I think also it highlights to me where the challenge is for payroll professionals, where they're trying so hard, working so many hours to make sure it's accurate and on time and with no errors. But then also there's expectations being put upon payroll professionals now. They also need to be more strategic. And I think that's what links into what Matthew said, is where we need to get technology to support us, to augment what we do, to really be that kind of co-pilot, without wanting to use that particular word, because it actually is an AI system, but that kind of that support to really help us achieve that. But what's your view on this, Simon?
Yes, now Matthew and Karen have probably seen a little bit of my views last week as I spoke at the Payroll Summit in London, which was an interesting event and probably entertaining. Because lots of these things conflict with each other, because Karen's probably hinted at it, but I think as a payroll service provider, the decision makers quite often, their focus is the top, reducing processing cost, rather than the others. But ensuring accuracy in dealing with errors is increasingly a challenge for us, predominantly because I think HR law has now transposed across into payroll application and process, whereas in the past, 20 years ago, it wasn't. HR did their thing. We just got figures and values, did a calculation, issued pay slips and paid people. But nowadays, there is so much complexity in the payroll application of what is really HR legislation, and has changed. And also we've got the Fair Work Agency coming into play potentially in April 26, and a policing activity. I mean, it's strange that nowadays in 1998, national minimum wage legislation came into play, yet in 2025, we still see hundreds of employers named for breaching national minimum wage legislation, and some of them are not small. They're quite large, wise businesses that should know what the application of law is, but seem to have struggle controlling it. And we have that in relation to two other areas. Well, I guess there's increasingly. One is there's the requirement on holiday pay, and also we've got to think about the new requirements on sickness, equality, gender, disability. There's all sorts of things that play into payroll, whereas traditionally years ago you said, well, what's that got to do with payroll at all? Increasingly it's pointed at us. Lots of so they all contradict. Does that make, so to ensure accuracy in dealing with errors, yet you want it to be fast. Well, speed can lead to error. Improving employee experience is important, but I mean, if I try and give an example, sometimes I think I go to the garage, I desire to drive a Rolls Royce. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? I want the silver lady on the front, blah, 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 blah. Then I go to the bank manager to get a loan to buy the Rolls Royce, and I end up buying a Fiat 500 because that's what they'll lend me the money for. And I think that's the experience of any procurement, and consequently you get what you pay for a little bit. So there's an element of balancing all these things, but it's interesting. And then we've got the challenge, because I think increasingly we're seeing in the drive for AI that the decision-making point is there, it will reduce head. Will it? Yeah. Or is AI really there to help us improve and achieve lots of these things so that we actually do our jobs better?
I agree. Well, let's jump back into the slides. Conscious people have looked at this poll for some time, and might just being imprinted on their minds like it's been imprinted on mine. But I think we could probably have a whole subject or a future conversation at digging into this a little bit deeper. I think in terms of how we manage those those conflicting priorities sometimes. We want speed, but not at the expense of others. We want better employee experience, but not at the expense of compliance. And I think getting that balance is a challenge, and I think it links into education, which Matthew obviously knows a lot about with the CIPP and how we can improve it from that side. I think it links to technology, which you've mentioned, Simon, and budgets, and also how do we get more investment. And I think there's lots of elements we could probably dive into in a future PQT. So watch this space. Before we jump into November budget, we've had one comment coming from Andrew. I just want to read out to the group. So I think one of the reasons some companies deal with accuracy and error issues is the fully managed payroll solution, where the data needs to be processed by the vendor, but the vendor never checks that data, as it is not their responsibility. After 15 years in the field, I cannot see any advantage for a fully managed UK payroll solution. I find it takes away flexibility, accuracy, and you spend large amounts of time constantly training their resources. Now, I would say, obviously, no vendors are mentioned here, but this probably does link slightly into what Simon said. Sometimes you get what you pay for, or have a look at your SLAs, really look at your agreements. I don't think that's necessarily the case for all vendors, by the way. I think there are some incredibly...
Yes. And I challenge that because I think the government statistics show that that's not really the case, because the accuracy is actually quite often with the vendors and the outsourced companies because they've got it there. But I think the point is correct. The vendor can only deal with the accuracy of the data they're given, and they don't have control of that. So I don't think it's a question of checking the vendor. I think it's a question of checking the data, really, in the accuracy in the process quite often. But I think statistically they show that the error rates are actually not that way round from an HMRC side on relation to accuracy of data.
I think also it shows there's no perfect model for any organization. Sometimes in-house payroll is absolutely the right way to go. Sometimes it's vendor, sometimes it's working with a bureau like Karen provides as well. So, there's lots of different horses for courses. One thing I've learned in the 2 decades I've done payroll is every payroll department without exception is unique. So, if the model isn't working, by all means try a different one. That's why there are so many different solutions in the market, and there's different educational journeys you can do. You can follow as well to meet those requirements.
Well, I would agree with that, Nick. I was just going to say outsourcing is not for everybody. It doesn't suit every business, so it is important to check what you actually need.
Absolutely right. Well, let's jump into the November budget. Rachel Reeves has announced the budget is going to be held on November 26th. We've got 2 more PQTs potentially till we can start predicting what may or may not happen in that budget. They've been under some fire over the last few months with certain things that have happened and people leaving government and everything else. But there is some important things that have happened, and there are going to be some changes to national insurance, national minimum wage implications, pensions, tax reforms. And of course, we want to hear our panel payroll predictions. So, I'm going to come back to you, Matthew, first. What are your thoughts? Tell us a little bit about what your predictions for the November budget.
Right, predictions. Don't hold me to any of these, but obviously, budget. We will get any changes to tax rates, whether that's national insurance or income tax. I would very much say it's unlikely that we'll see any changes to income tax with the past pledges from the current government, but they're always trying to find different ways to raise some tax revenue, so I would never say never. We'll likely get the confirmation of the national minimum wage rates before the budget, usually a couple of days before the Low Pay Commission confirms their recommendation to the government. It's then on the government to take on board those recommendations and set the national minimum wage rates. There's been some talk about those pension tax relief reforms. I'm not sure how much substance there is to that. What I would say is that we're very rapidly approaching the time of vast media speculation and seeing what goes down well with public opinion, which can be a very sort of dangerous time to be aware of things like this with policy, because you see a lot of different things and some of them may come to fruition and a lot of them will not. So it's always worth tempering expectations if you do hear anything in the media until the day of the budget and find out what's actually proposed by government. But as far as payroll predictions go, I think there are some things that we will see out of the Employment Rights Bill. I would suspect that the government is now wanting to get that Employment Rights Bill through the consideration of amendment stage before budget, so that they have a lot of nice sound bites to use in the budget about raising worker standards, etc., and worker rights. But as you sort of alluded to, Nick, there has been some government reshuffles, and a couple of these sort of large proponents of the Employment Rights Act measures within that bill have been moved out of government / resigned. So will we see some changes that are maybe more pro-business and pro-growth changed within the original writings of the Employment Rights Bill? I'm not sure whether it would be wise to do that this late in the process. What people want is continuity and understanding what's going to happen, not necessarily for things to be flipped and changed all the time. But like I said, I'd never say never.
I was just pausing there for a slight cough. Karen, let me come to you. What are your thoughts? Obviously, again, impacts you ever so slightly differently from a bureau perspective, but any changes to national insurance, how's that going to impact you, national minimum wage implications as well?
I agree with what Matthew said, to be fair, without being political, as we try not to be on here. Yeah. I think given in all the years I've been in payroll, involved in all of this, I haven't seen such an unsettlement in the government space as we have in the last sort of 6 months. So I would be, if I were the Chancellor, I'd be very wary about putting any additional costs on employers. Now, I look at various news items every day, as we all do, and there was a survey done by, I think it was the FSB, where they said, and again, this comes back to Matthew's point about the media speculation, so I'll caveat with that, where they've said 90% of the businesses that they surveyed, and I think it was around about 4,500, believe that the Chancellor will remove salary sacrifice. Now, that in itself is a tax on workers. So again, it would also be a tax on employers because of the national insurance part if they keep the NI savings. Many don't. Many put it back into the pension scheme on behalf of the employees or use part of it for the admin costs. So whilst that's being mooted around in the media, I'd be very surprised if they do that, because of the implications it would have on the manifesto. I don't think they'll do anything with national insurance other than, again, you're seeing in the news more around landlords, self-employed, and what they might do in that space, because there tends to be language used that means that those who are self-employed aren't viewed as workers for some reason. I don't agree with that, but that tends to be the language. So will they do something in that space so that it's not workers as in employed workers? Possibly. National minimum wage, I think they will increase that, as they I don't see them, they're certainly not going to reduce it, put it that way. So I can see that going up. How much by? Again, it's been mooted, what, 4-5%. So I think we may find, although there's a lot of media activity and even, you could argue, unrest, and when I'm speaking to businesses, they are very, very unsettled. You are seeing terminations, you are seeing non-recruitment of staff. I mean, that is real, but it's because they are uncertain rather than necessarily struggling, if that makes sense. It's the uncertainty. So it's a shame, I think, that the budget is so late. But I imagine it's so late because they really are going to have to try and pull some magic out the hat.
One extra thing that has just popped back into my head that could be very interesting from a payroll perspective. The state pension potentially could be rising to £12,577, which you might notice is slightly above the your personal allowance. So is something going to happen to the personal allowance, whether that's raised up or exemptions for pensioners? Who knows, but there's something there that potentially needs to be, not necessarily needs to be rectified, but from an administration point of view from HMRC, I'm sure they want that to be rectified to stop a lot of self-assessment forms or having to deal with that on the sort of tax system side.
Yeah, no, that's a good observation. I was listening to radio too, and I think they were talking about pensions expecting to rise by 4.7% under triple lock. And I think that was linking to some of the jobs market, which is my space. And I'll be honest, that is certainly flatlined to a certain degree. It's been a challenging jobs market for those that operate in the recruitment space.
Yeah,
not expanding.
The issue with the wage growth portion of the triple lock is that, as you're saying, and a lot of people are observing, natural wage growth isn't really materializing. A large portion of that wage growth that forms that statistic is from those national minimum wage rises. So there's kind of a knock-on effects with all these different policies interacting with each other, in that the national minimum wage increases wage growth, which looks good on paper, but if everyone else's wage growth isn't going up, it kind of doesn't really sort of stand the test of that statistic.
It's almost like a bit of spin being used to show an increase that isn't actually being experienced by everybody. I saw that, so I think on the CIPB website, they had mentioned inflation said it was at 3.8% and food had risen by 5.1%. So, you know, it's challenging out there at the minute. Simon, I saw you nodding along. What are your thoughts on the November budget? Things maybe we need to prepare for, or any additional observations that haven't been made yet so far?
Well, from the software side, November 26th budget is a disaster because we've got a very short time. But I think that then expands out. So I'm just thinking of what are some of the impacts of that late budget are. And then you've got devolved governments, of course. So Scotland can't really set its tax rates until it knows what Westminster is doing. Wales follows suit. So I imagine there's rumblings going on in the devolved parliaments and the assemblies saying, oh my goodness, we've got our pre-budgets, which are supposed to be taking imminently place around that time. What are we going to have to wait, or what do we do? Because no matter what Rachel says, it will impact them in some way. But interesting times. I think, as Matthew indicated at the beginning, I think we're going to get a lot of wild speculation in the lead up, which might scare some of us, which I think, you know, 80% will not fruition into anything. But let's see what happens. Of course, we're about to be hit as a nation with the advertising campaign for making tax digital for income tax, which relates to those who have property and side businesses. If your income's over certain limits, you've got to go and do your tax returns electronically. That's going to start hitting. These messages are all going to coincide around similar sorts of time. So the public's going to get tax in their face all the time. Minimum wage rises is quite a hit. We've got popularity of salary sacrifice, and of course you're going to get another swathe of people that can't continue. So what are we as employers going to do about it? Because you haven't got enough money to sacrifice. So they may have an EV, etc. The other
before I know you're going to move on, but just my own ignorance here, maybe this is well known in the payroll circle, so my apologies as someone who looks at it from a different lens. What happens if you're midway through a salary sacrifice? You're halfway through a salary sacrifice purchase for a bike or an EV vehicle, and then that does change. How does that shift? Do you just lose it? Do you have to, you know, what happens in that scenario?
Well, the employee, if I take it from one angle, is contractually entitled to receive that benefit. The employer is lawfully not allowed to sacrifice below national minimum wage or the national living wage rates. So the employer ends up footing the bill. I'm sure in reality that doesn't happen, and the benefit is potentially withdrawn before the agreement ends. The challenge there is that might be a breach of contract. So you may actually find unions and parties starting to challenge that legally because you've actually contractually agreed to provide it. That's the angle. Now, quite often we view those things as being tied together. They're actually not tied together. They're two separate legal contractual agreements which just align. The fact that one side breaks doesn't break the other side, and that's the challenge that we'll face. So I think it's going to be increasingly a problem, but for many people they'll say for a long time we've never had a national minimum wage challenge, and you could say, why are we still getting hundreds? And it's sort of for the past, since 1998, their wages have been so far above NMW that they've never really had to consider anything. But now with the rise, they're close or crossing, so they're now below, so they've got to consider it for the first time. So NMW rates are significantly higher than they were proportionally, and maybe that will continue for some time. That seems to be a little bit the intention. So we have to see what goes on. But the popularity of those things are all about savings. The government are obviously picking up on it, and that's the hint I think you've got with pension salary sacrifice. The government review. I find it a perverse sort of consideration, because they talk about a tax loss. The reality is those earnings are not taxable, so there is no tax loss. But I understand what they're saying. They're saying if they were taxable, the government or the country would have so much more money in the pot to spend, paying off the interest charges probably. So you can see where they're coming from, is actually people are really taking advantages of these schemes. 20 years ago, what was it, 5%? Nowadays, what is it, 60%? It's kind of, the popularity has increased. I mean, it's a discussion I had once a long time ago in Somerset House, or on the bridge there, or around the corner, with HMRC, that I went in there. I was called in to have a discussion about an article I wrote on salary sacrifice schemes, and they brought me in for a telling off. But I kind of sat in the reception area and picked up the magazine, the employer magazine for HMRC staff, and I went into the office and saw this gentleman. He told me, you can't say this, blah blah blah, and etc. And I opened this magazine to the back page, showed him the advert, and said, have a read of that. And then he said, oh dear, what silly billies we are. And I went, because they were advertising the HMRC salary sacrifice scheme in the back page of the staff magazine.
I would love to have been a fly on the wall for that meeting, I have to say. Anyone going up against what I would call the encyclopedia of payroll is that, you got to know your stuff. You got to know your stuff if you're going to bring Simon Parsons in. That's what I would say. Interesting on your point, Kim has mentioned, if salary sacrifice is stopped, how will this affect the companies that operate a pension salary sacrifice?
Pension payroll leaders, if you're listening to this, you already know that payroll has never been more complex. Compliance risks are rising, skilled talent is scarce, and getting it wrong can cost your business way more than just money. It can cost you trust, retention, and of course, brand reputation. I'm Nick Day, host of this show and also CEO of JGA Recruitment Group, specialist global payroll recruiters. Here at JGA, we're so passionate about payroll, we've even turned it into music. Don't believe us? Head to your favorite audio platform and search for Payroll Powers the World, and you can quite literally join us in song about how we believe payroll deserves its moment in the boardroom to shine. At JGA, we'd like to think our passion shines through to our recruitment results as well. With a 97% retention rate and an average 19-day job brief to hire success rate, we work fast, we work strategically, and we work with purpose to connect you to the hidden payroll talent that job ads and direct search methods will simply never reach. So if you're hiring or indeed planning to hire, why not partner with the experts that are shaping the future of payroll? Partner with jgarecruitment.com today, or better yet, drop me a message directly, and together we can make sure your next payroll hire is your best one yet.
I would hope that, I'm going to again channel Karen, try not to be political, but I would hope no one would make the decision stupid enough to get rid of salary sacrifice on pensions, because just for the overall knock-on effects of that, in terms of, you don't want to discourage people saving into a workplace pension, which if you increase the cost of that for individuals, they may feel discouraged, or that they're not getting the sort of best bang for their buck out of their pension contributions. So I think anything that interrupts the sort of flow of automatic enrolment and getting people to save into a workplace pension should have a lot more care and consideration put into it than just get rid of it. So if they were to do that, I would expect a much longer consultation period, and I don't think they've allowed time to do that. So personal opinion maybe, but I would hope that they would not do that for pension schemes.
Okay, good.
And I'm with Matthew on that. I think it would be very bold of them to actually do it, but there's a lot of talk and speculation about it.
I think the other thing to bear in mind is obviously if they did, as it would now, if somebody had to be removed from the salary sacrifice for whatever reason or it went, then obviously you have to put them into a pension scheme that would be non-salary sacrifice. However, picking up on both those points, where I think the government, any government in the future now or otherwise, may consider it is if you look at those pension tax relief reforms. So if you're in a net pay, and ignore that it's the wrong way around as we know for payroll, but a net pay scheme where, in other words, you have tax deducted after your pension. There is talk about them, instead of having it as the tax relief that you pay, so 20%, 40%, 45%, if they were to make that a flat rate, which they've talked about of say 30%, administratively, it would be far easier if it was done by the pension providers and not then through payroll. So that might be a point at some point. Again, it will take a brave government to do this, to remove that, because at the moment, if they were to introduce such a thing, you're talking of employers having to figure out who's 20%, a bit like doing PSAs in real time, who's 20%, who's 40%, and a lot of jiggery pokery administratively, whereas it would make it easier, I think, administratively, if it didn't, there was no tax relief through payroll, but it was all done by the pension provider. So perhaps in the future, but I say, I'm with both Matthew and Simon. I think it would be political suicide personally, if any government to do that at this point in time.
The only other point I'd like to make, and I think this links something that Matthew said earlier in terms of education. So again, don't want to be political on the show, but I think there's an outcome here that not everyone's considering, which is payroll numbers have fallen for a seventh month in a row. Now, fallen payroll numbers, may not necessarily think that has an impact, but eventually, if numbers fall so much, you'll need less people in your payroll team to process for. If you've suddenly lost 3,000 people within your organization, then arguably your payroll team will also start to get smaller. Now, I'm always a positive pint half full kind of person, so it also means that more talent will be potentially entering the market, and for employers might start to change the way they hire. But what I would say is, if we continue on that trend and people are starting, payrolls are getting smaller, I would recommend taking an angle to take an educational journey, get sharper, find a niche that you specialize in, really sharpen up those payroll skills, because actually they become more and more niche when the numbers get less, and more specialist skills are required. And maybe it's a little bit early to be bringing this up, but from a recruitment perspective, we are seeing hiring demand flatten and slow. And when people are hiring, they are now being more demanding on the skills they're requesting, because it's slowed down, because there is more talent in the market. So if you are nervous, or if you have an opportunity to upskill yourself in a particular space, now actually isn't a bad time to do it, because payroll numbers continue to fall. Those niche skills will become more and more important, and it does start to impact the industry on a broader lens. If there's less people working, there's less need for as many payroll people to process those payrolls. So there is a broader aspect to that as well. From the perspective I look at it, I don't see the salary sacrifice implications in quite the same way that you guys do, but I see it from a slightly different lens. So I wanted to make that point. Any other comments, or should we move into the tax advice market?
Just one final point on national minimum wage. We may see the Low Pay Commission's strategy for getting rid of that 18 to 20-year-old age bracket, which does mean, again, I've mentioned this probably for the last couple of years, that if you are an employer that hires a lot of younger workers, those lower age bands may see a disproportionately higher increase to the national minimum wage levels than the national living wage, for example. So do be aware of that when thinking about forecasting.
We've had similar alignment with apprentices as well, haven't we, Matthew? So the apprentice rate has tipped to the bottom level of age banding, and if that's going to disappear eventually, just watch where the apprentices fall.
Great. And Mark has just put a comment into the questions box as well to say, removing salary sacrifice pensions will be another increase in NI for employers, as they will lose the current savings, which I think is a point that Simon and Karen made earlier in the show as well. So a very, very good observation. Right, tax advice market. A couple of things we're going to talk about here is there is a new requirement for payroll agents to register. A requirement for AML may take time to implement. There's a supervisory body, and new tax advice registration impact on those who provide payroll services. So, which of course all of our panel do. So let's start with Karen for this, because I imagine there's some impacts here for you and the clients that you service. So tell us more.
Actually, I'm in a better position than some payroll service providers who are not. I say better only because of the way in which we operate as an accountancy firm. So as an accountancy firm who is currently supervising our situation, ICAEW, so the Institute for Chartered Accountants for England and Wales, or Institute of Chartered Accountants for Scotland, for Scottish offices, we have to do what's called Know Your Client. Our supervisory body is those. We have to do the AML. In fact, we have to jump through hoops basically at the moment for what we do before we have to risk assess everything. And that is what we do as an accountancy firm. However, there will be accountancy firms out there who don't do all of these things. And if you're providing a payroll service and you're one of the listeners or one of the people on this webinar now, do check. Because it might be something. So for me, I have to, well, me and my team do them where what we call a payroll only client. So there's no other services being offered by Armstrong Watson or they're taking up. I'm very pleased to say the moment they take up audit, it goes off to audit and I don't have to bother doing it. But if you are providing payroll services and you're part of an accountancy firm, and particularly where you have clients that only you provide payroll for, you need to check what currently goes on. Now, early indications might suggest that for those who are already registered, and I'm only saying early indications because a bit like everything else at the moment that might be implemented by April 2026, it's we'll do it, you do it, but we won't give you any help or guidance and tell you what you've actually got to do. So early indications suggest that an agent like ourselves or an accountancy firm, because we are already registered, we may not have to go through such a long-winded process as perhaps some others. And obviously I'll leave Simon probably to come on to those who aren't accountancies, but I say just because you are an accountancy firm, you should already be doing this, but it doesn't mean that you are. I am aware of some smaller accountancy firms in particular who maybe have dabbled a bit, but aren't doing it as what will be required. So there is going to be this code of the, of what the register, and I think it's important to distinguish between the two. This is not being a tax advisor. This is about, I think Matthew would reiterate this point, it is to separate of what these regulate or this guidance is meaning. It's about registering as with a supervisory body, not suddenly that we're all tax advisors, because we're not. It's about that we've been caught up in this, but I say as part of the, so for me, for once on this call, like I say, but the warning I will give, and it is, if this carries on to April 26th, and there are many representatives, including myself, that have said that is a ridiculous date to bring such a thing in, is first of all, decide who your regulator or your supervisory body could be. So if you're part of a firm that's got already supervising some other way, ask the question. If not, it will be HMRC, and they have fees, so they will need to be budgeted. Do not underestimate the Know Your Client, the risk assessments involved, and the anti-money laundering legislation checks you must do. They will take time, and they will take a lot of your time. Start looking, if you have a lot of clients in particular, then do start looking at the software packages that are available. Tap into this network, any network that you've got with fellow payroll professionals like myself, like Simon and others, to say, what do you use? How do you go about this? Please, please do not struggle. Please seek and talk to people who are doing this, because it, and it's not a scaremongery here. This is all doable. We do it, but it will be new to many. And I'll stop there and probably hang over to Simon from a different angle.
I'll come over to Simon because I'm with a little question that you can just open up with here, Simon, to answer. I've had a question from Carrie. It says, does tax advice market apply to those in-house payroll? Maybe you can challenge that before you add the other comments, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Well, before I do that, I'll explain a little bit about what we're talking about with tax advice market, if that's all right, because we could think, as payroll, are we tax advisors? And strictly under the Economic Crimes Unit, HMRC definition, if you're only providing guidance or following or signposting, you're not actually given, because when we think of tax advice, it's like, I've got a bit of a problem, can you help me out? Payroll isn't doing that, is it? Payrolls, they work 10 hours, they pay 50 quid, work out the tax and national insurance, software does that. What advice have you given? You haven't given anything. Well, the new definition under the tax advice market is they've expanded the tax advice definition to be any contact with HMRC. So you don't have to give tax advice as we traditionally think of it. You just have to interact on behalf of a client with the government. If you do that, you're considered a tax advisor, even if you've given no advice. That's the difference in this. So if you look at the legislation, it's not about advice, it's about interacting with HMRC on behalf of someone else for anything mundane where you haven't given any advice at all. So they've changed the definition of tax advice, because before the ECU definition excluded payroll unless it was giving advice. And so there is that subtle difference. So remind me of the question that no, in-house. So in relation to in-house, if you're employed by the employer acting on their behalf, are you a tax advisor for this purpose as an agent? The answer is no. Okay, so you don't have to be registered or regulated as an in-house payroll professional. However, I'm going to caveat this, are you actually employed by the employer? And also, for many of you that are in-house, you actually do payrolls for your neighbour or other sorts of businesses that associate with. So, you know, so there's be careful. So you might actually be, you know, I've forgotten the name of them, but you've got things where your brand is branded out to other businesses which are totally independent, and you just happen to do the payroll. You're not doing them for your business, you're doing them for associated businesses that are their own. So you've actually made yourself an agent. So quite often shared service centres, for example, across multiple employers, are probably going to be an agent, because you're not actually in-house at all, but we may think of ourselves as in-house. Does that help a little bit? So in-house, if you're truly in-house, then no.
What's the best way then to self-police it, Simon, so we don't fall into that territory where an employee thinks that we have given that kind of advice? And I'm sure they'll probably come to someone like the CRPP saying, I've got myself in a fix here. You know, how do we get out of this? Or you know, I'm pretty sure that I didn't, but this is what's come at me. How can we make sure we're just protecting ourselves?
Well, let's talk about some of the obligations under AML. If this all goes ahead, and the indication at the moment is that's the proposal, we've still got to see what the final outcome is, because it's sort of finishing a consultation exercise again. Because at the moment the law talks about person, but I think the indication in the responses we've had in discussions is it's not about a person, it's about an organisation. But the law, the draft legislation, doesn't mention organisations, it mentions person. So there's an element of thinking, what does that mean, and get that clarity out soon. But it's difficult. Under AML, you have to due diligence your clients. So what does that mean? You have to prove their ownership. So you have to check credentials of all the owners of all your clients and make sure they're not a Russian oligarch. Is that fair to say? Got to be careful in my political correctness a little bit. Or a criminal, or known, or you're on a sanctioned list, and there are sanctioned lists. So there are certain people that you will not be able to trade with as a business. And if you do currently, you'll have to end it. All right, and then you can risk assess. So you then have to risk assess your clients. And some people are considered high risk. Does that mean you shouldn't trade with them? I'm not going to suggest that's true. So for example, a lord in the House of Lords would be considered high risk. An MP would be considered high risk. So that just means you've got to pay some special attention on what sort of there'll be other classifications which are high risk as well. Foreign nationals of certain types, diplomats probably, etc. And will those people be involved in operations of business at senior levels? Absolutely they will. So that just means you have to have identified them as high risk. Then you have to risk assess what you do. And as a general principle, I'd say if you're calculating pay and paying staff, it's low risk. However, seeing some of the questions on social media, Nick, that you and I see, and I get involved with and answer.
I do.
Sometimes
I quite enjoy you getting involved, Simon. I like to watch from afar as an audience member, to be fair, with all your wisdom and your witticisms, I should say.
Yeah, and a bit of tongue in cheek as well at times.
Yeah.
But sometimes, going back to Karen's point, sometimes those people are payroll people in accountancy firms, and it seems like they have very little supervision. I'm not saying that's for all, but some of them, it seems like they don't seem to have due diligence of the clients. They don't seem to risk assess. And from the nature of the question, the client is wanting them to undertake what could be considered criminal activity. Is that fair to say? Otherwise, they wouldn't be asking the question. Maybe they would know. And equally, as part of the tax advice market proposal, there's an obligation for us to apply by the agent code. Now, an interesting angle I always go on about, because I see it so often, even at shows and things, got people saying, yes, and we're fully accredited by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. We meet 100% compliance. They've certified us. To make such a claim is actually contrary to the agent code. You can't. So I always think if someone tells me they're HMRC accredited, don't believe them, because you can't claim it even if they are, because it's contrary to the agent code. So there's just
and always check. People make lots of claims without having anything whatsoever. We just assume because they've told us that they'll be on there, and you check and realise that they're not. I've seen Matthew smirking a couple of times and nodding along. Matthew, what are your thoughts? Anything you'd like to add to this, or Simon's comments?
Oh, lots and lots to add to this. So,
I was watching your responses as he was talking.
I've just finished the CIPPs. I say just finished. We've submitted it on Monday. The CIPP's response to the draft legislation. It's technically not a consultation, which is important to note because we probably won't get a summary of responses from this. But if you want to read the CIPP's response, it's freely available for anyone to read on our website. And just to tease out a few of the things, so yes, the intention of this is if you interact with HMRC on behalf of an individual or a client, you will be deemed to be an agent, a tax advisor, sorry. The exemptions are if you work within a company and operate in the nature of that business normally operating, you don't need to register. And if you provide payroll software only. Now, a couple of things that we've asked for clarification on is if I work, as Simon said, in a business but provide payroll or do the payroll for a connected businesses, whether that's a sister company, a parent company, etc., franchise arrangements, anything like that, what are the rules around that? Because as far as those people would be concerned with themselves, they are running payroll in the normal operation of that business. They're not necessarily outsourcing in the traditional sense. So we want clarification on that. We also want clarification on where the line is drawn with providing payroll software only, because there are certain actions that software providers will undertake in assisting people who use their software to submit things to HMRC properly. They might take on certain tasks themselves. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting involved in running the payroll, but we still need to know where those dividing lines are, so to speak. We've had clarification that, again, this should be at the organisation level, not at the individual level, so you don't have to worry about having your entire team of payroll professionals supervised for anti-money laundering. And as far as supervisory bodies goes, so as Karen said, we don't think that the timescales involved are very workable. We have not asked them to postpone the 2026 start date, but what we are urging for is the transitional period, which they're setting at least 3 months. We've asked that it's at least 12 months because we feel that people need time to get themselves set up with getting registered. One of the things that I found with my investigation is that a lot of payroll services are operated through the agent services account, and that is generally HMRC's preferred method. If you sign up for that, you have to prove that you have AML supervision. There is another account which is deemed to be a legacy account, which is the agent online services account, not confusing at all. But that doesn't require you to prove that you have AML supervision, and is all sort of a light version of the account. Then, of course, you've got people who are just using their clients' login credentials to access the government gateways, which Karen's cringing there because you absolutely shouldn't be doing that. However, we do know that it does happen. So we need to allow those impacted parties time to get set up on the correct way of working. One of the things that we've said in our consultation response, and because it's on the website, it's freely available for anyone to read now, I can talk about this. We are actively exploring becoming a supervisory body. If payroll professionals need to be supervised for AML, I personally think that probably the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals should be a good place for those people to get that supervision. If you're operating payroll only services, like Karen said, she's part of an accountancy practice, so she can go through ICAEW or IAB. There's all sorts of different accountancy professional bodies that offer those sort of that help and support, but there's no one that does that purely for payroll at the moment. So we're looking at exploring that, seeing if we can become accredited with OPBAS to do that supervision and better support and help the pay professions.
Well, that sounds very exciting. There's a couple of comments that have come in as well. So one comes in from Leanne. It says, someone comes in from Tracy. Have read the document, Matthew. Excellent points raised in it. Very interesting and thought-provoking. So if you've got a link for that, Matthew, send it through to me and I'll share it with the group. Sounds like people are finding it. Someone's also asked if we've got any advice on payroll-only providers with AML, where only providing a payroll service, you don't necessarily have access to any data that you can flag as suspicious activity, as you're only processing information provided by the client. You do not have access to banking, etc., to confirm net pays, for example, are being paid.
Not relevant, Nick. Yeah, it's not about banking at all. And I think that's the common misunderstanding with anti-money laundering, is it's about to do with money. It's not. The provision of supervision is about accountancy service providers. There may be no money involved, but with payroll, we're calculating and undertaking certain activity. So I guess there's an element of, and we see it in the market, and actually there's been a load of press releases today, I think from memory, Matthew may be to remind me about the umbrella market space. So there's new law coming in which passes, because in the umbrella market there's a lot of tax avoidance. Not all umbrellas, some are working correctly, but many, over 200 now named, are promoting or have promoted tax avoidance schemes where you think under this new legislation they'd be caught by AML requirements. It's not about cash, it's about accountancy transactions.
Just to give you a flavour, just to sort of help, is the things that, because I quite agree, it's like, somebody, when I look at what we've got to do, so when you particularly around the risk assessment and what have you, it's like, well, I don't know if they're wealthy. I might know if we take on the payroll and I might see what they earn. But so what we're looking for as a guide only, so please, this isn't advice, it is a guide, is you might go to Companies House, and what you might be looking for is that they're not late with their company accounts. That's a good indicator that they're operating with diligence and they are compliant. We use a software, well, actually we use two, one called Legal, one called Red Flag. So we look at Red Flag, and what that will tell us is what their credit status is. So obviously, if you've got red flags, as it would sound, and there are other software products, I'm only using what our company uses. I have no idea whether it's good, bad or ugly. So that might then flag and say, well, actually, or they've got a gold credit rating. That would sort of indicate to us, okay, they're in business, they're not about to go down. Doesn't mean that they won't go down tomorrow. It's just that's sort of looking good. Then we use Legal, because as part of all this, you need to get the ID of any shareholder with 25% or more. I know Companies House have also changed the rules that they want any directors, provide them with IDs. One could have hoped that they would have aligned, but they're not. So we then use Legal, which gives us an opportunity to find who that person is, because they could have complex structures. And we say, hello, Mr. Bloggs, please can you provide us you need a photographic ID and you need proof of address. So they can then do that through software. If you are a much smaller entity, you might do that manually and say, can you pop into the office and let me see these documents. So it's that kind of thing, because in payroll you are quite right, it's not about the money, because we don't transact any money. And I remember, Simon, and you will remember this, years ago having this argument with HMRC when AML first came in, of we're not physically moving money about. Even when you do backs, it's a file that the client authorizes. So it's sort of, have a look at, you know, the rules, have a look, because it's all about risk assessment. Of, you've assessed that client, and do you believe that they are a legitimate client that you were able to do? And as Simon said before, you can have a client, for example, high risk would be an arms dealer. Now, we might think of an arms dealer as somebody in Libya firing out guns somewhere, but actually you can have a business that's, for example, in the defence industry, that is actually still viewed as arms, but of course it's a legitimate defence contract business that's supplying, I don't know, torpedo heads for the Ministry of Defence. So it's all those things where the industry might be high risk, it might be niche, but that doesn't mean that you can't then work with them. So it's more things like that that you have to think about, and that's the bit that sort of takes it. I would say it's time consuming, but when you get into the hang of it, it's using a bit of common sense as well with some of the stuff that's out there that will help you risk assess. Would you agree with that, Simon? I think, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it's a risk assessing the activity, isn't it? So general payroll, you know, I'll give an opinion here, so you don't have to take it as fact. General position of payroll, it's low risk. However, some clients ask us to do periphery things, which some of them may border on avoidance or evasion. They're not low risk, and they may be reportable, even though you don't transact the cash. So if you know that a client's in a position of doing tax evasion, you may find it's a reportable item. The funny thing about reportable items is you're not allowed to tell them. You report the crime without telling them. You're under that obligation. Now, there is an element of, do we obligate our clients to a code of conduct, just the same as we as agents have to abide by a code of conduct, to say that actually you would expect them in the course of business to be honest and true in all they're doing, meeting their legal obligations. And I think there's soundness to potential looking at contracts in that way, that they are contracted to do that, because you know, there are rogue players out there. I'm not saying it's everyone, it might be a minority.
And I was just going to add as well with AML, sorry if I may, just another thing just for people to think about. As part of that, it's not you do it once and that's the end. There is an ongoing obligation. We have to do it every year, but also as part of that, all those involved, certainly in our business, have to undergo annual AML training as well. So you have to have, it's a bit like having procedures. It's no good if nobody knows what they are. So you will have to do that as well. So do think about that as well.
Yeah. Great point raised. Thanks, Karen. I'm going to move on because I'm conscious of time, and we still got to get through student loans. The Plan 5 start April 26, new thresholds for plans, getting ready for the start of checklist. And people like me may have been, you know, there'll be others that people are going to university now and need to be more mindful of this is all to come. But, you know, we've just got into a new term. People have started new schools. Both of mine have started secondary and college. And it's student loans we have to prepare for both as parents and as payroll people. So, Matthew, I know that Simon and Karen have had a bit of airtime there. So I'm going to come to you for this one. Tell us a little bit about student loans and what we need to prepare for.
Yeah, so this is the first year that we would expect Plan 5 to be coming through to the payroll starting in April. Now, the important thing that came out of the technical specifications for Plan 5 is that Plan 5 is actually going to become the default loan type to take. So if you don't have a starter checklist, or you just don't know what student loan type they're on, we're going to default now onto Plan 5. Plan 1's been uprated. I think we're still waiting on Plan 3. Simon, is it the Scottish?
We haven't got 2 or 3. Well, we've got Scotland. We don't have Plan 2 or postgraduate loans yet.
That's it, still waiting on those. And actually something on here for me to take away and research. I'd not heard about the student loans earnings after death, so I will go look that up and make sure I'm clued up on that. So thank you for having put these slides together. And there is a proposal for including better student loan things on the self-assessment. And just a quick note on things like the self-assessment. Simon, Karen and myself were all at the HMRC stakeholder conference this week, and there's a big focus on the modernisation and digitalisation of everything that they're doing, and some of the things that were discussed around things like pre-populating things. So for example, pre-populating self-assessments to try and prompt people to make sure that they're putting the right information in there. So just as a sort of a view into what we're working on behind the scenes with HMRC and the information that they're giving us, really sort of working on making sure that all of these things that we're seeing, whether that's student loans, self-assessment, new tax year stuff, comes through digital methods, and we move away from any sort of legacy processes that involve paper and phones.
Great. Simon, maybe you I don't know who put these slides together, so maybe you can bring us up to speed a little bit on the new guidance. There we are. Whoever put that element in there, let's talk about the new guidance, and we can educate the audience.
Sure. So yeah, there's a couple of aspects. Well, I'm going to skip into Matthew's question there on earnings after death. The collection of student loans information implied that an employer had to deduct student loan on any earnings earned before death, which were paid after. Now, I challenged that, personally I challenged that and said that's contrary to CWG2, because student loan is assessable against Class 1 eniable earnings, and earnings after death, no matter when earned, are not subject to Class 1 national insurance. Therefore, they're not subject to student loan. So I think they've picked it up. They're now looking at the guidance on the student loan side because it's contrary to the regulations. So although they wanted the money on it, you don't pay student loans on monies paid after death, because they're not subject to Class 1 national insurance, which is the overriding factor. That's the problem we have with self-assessment, I guess, in student loans as well, isn't it? Because they've been using taxable gross, and we used to have it with generic messages. So generic messages used to say, you haven't taken student loan plan 1, why haven't you taken it? You need to make sure that you do. That's because originally they were judging it against taxable gross. Taxable gross has got nothing to do with student loans. Plus, it would have benefit values in it and other things which have got nothing to do with Class 1. The student loans are applied to Class 1 earnings, and they've actually fixed the generic messages, so they're not produced. They now use Class 1 earnings. They used to argue they couldn't use Class 1 earnings because it was an optional field. It's not optional. It's mandatory if there are Class 1 contributions. If it was missing, it meant they didn't have it, and I think they picked that up. It took about 3 years to get that across to the HMRC policy people and CSL, etc., but they actually picked it up. I've got to say the secretary of that group these days, excellent. I won't talk about the one before. Yeah, the other thing is about the starter checklist has come out. So we've seen draft designs of the starter checklist. Starter checklist historically has been confusing, especially when you tick multiple plans. And you can have a plan 1, a plan 4, a postgraduate loan, even a plan 2, especially those that were went to university under plan 1. They then did their PGCE under plan 2, and they've done a master's in Scotland. You know, it's that sort of thing, or some other extension in Scotland. You can have multiples, so that's not rare. The current electronic new starter checklist tells the employer all of them, and there's an element of, there's a pecking order, as Matthew said, so plan 5 takes priority. So it goes plan 5, plan 1, plan 2, and plan 4 is last, isn't it? Because it's the higher. Scotland have been raising their threshold, so plan 4. At one time, plan 4 was a before plan 2, but now it's after. So just be aware. So there's a new starter checklist. The new starter checklist wording I've seen implies they're trying to get the employee to only tick the plan that's for deduction, not multiples. So that's a change. So they, you know, so if you've got a plan 5 and a 1 and a 4, tick plan 5.
Anything to add to that, Karen? No. Fantastic.
Yeah,
We'll
I'm
do
quite.
that.
I know. Who would have thought?
There you go. And there's no more questions on this either, so we've covered it. So I want to jump back to the slide regarding, just remind everyone about the SD Worx HR and Payroll Pulse. You'll see more information on your screens coming up where there is a download link. Now I have put this in the chat, so you can find this as well in the chat if you want to click through that way. But just to remind everyone, this is the biggest piece of research of its kind across Europe, 16,000 employees, 5,625 HR decision makers across 16 countries. This report really does highlight many really insights in relation to payroll. So it's really worth a download and a read. What I've got, everybody, as well, just to remind everyone, of course, the Payroll Podcast has featured 2 of our panel members recently. I've put those links in the show notes as well if you want to find out more. We actually cover some topics we've covered on the show as well. So Richard George talks about the future of payrolling benefits, what every payroll pro needs to know. Sadly, he's not with us today due to a delayed flight. But again, we get lots of questions around payrolling benefits, so an episode worth listening to. And of course, Karen Thompson's episode, The Ultimate Guide to Becoming a Partner in Payroll. If you're watching this from an accountancy practice, and or even if you're not, but you just are interested to find out more about that journey, a really insightful episode, and it was a great conversation. And I'm going to put it out there, I'll be getting Simon on the show soon enough as well. So if you have any ideas for topic titles, put them in my questions box, and I'll consider them for Simon's episode. But yeah, lots going on in the world of payroll.
Though, Nick, wouldn't it?
It will indeed be part 2. You have, of course, been on the show in the past.
I haven't Matthew here, Nick, just to sort of drop Matthew into it as well.
Open invite to any panelists on this show. Matthew, get in touch if you want to be featured. Absolutely right. We can talk about some of those consultations you've been involved in and some of that research you've been doing. It'd be a fantastic addition to the show. And of course, PQT will be released as well on the Payroll Podcast. So if you haven't managed to listen into the whole show today, or you want to catch it again, or you've missed something, as well as the slides being sent through and that survey, it will be released in audio in about a week's time. So keep an eye out for that. Right, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Are there any other hot topics that either Matthew, Karen, or Simon would like to address that perhaps weren't on the slides over the last 5 minutes? I've got nothing in my questions box at the moment, so an opportunity, if any recent news has come in since we pulled these slides together, to maybe to talk about.
Well, the only thing that comes to mind that's actually, it's a little bit of a fear. I'm not sure if I should really say that publicly. We know there's change for statutory sick pay, and we know there's change for statutory parental bereavement pay, Northern Ireland. Now, that may only affect very few of our listeners, but it may affect some of them if you've got employees in Northern Ireland. Both coming in April. We have an RTI tech spec that gives us a field and tells us the type of value. Apart from that, the relevant departments, DWP and Northern Ireland Assembly, have provided very little detail on the implementation process. We know probably a little bit more about SSP, but I think we're waiting for a whole plethora. It's been about 4 months from my recall of the transition from old to new rules, and we still don't have any answers for that. My fear there from a software developer community lead is time is running out. And that plea is sort of being made to government, but just be wary, because you need the guidance to update your policies and procedures to support these when they do come in. Because we can see this year, SNCP was confirmed in February. Now, if I was to be honest with you, a lot of software wouldn't have been ready for April when it started. The benefit of SNCP is there would have been very few cases. So by the time they were ready in May or June, they probably had no cases to that point. With SSP, it's different. And staying with SPBP Northern Ireland, if you're heavy into Northern Ireland employment, because it's actually extended to miscarriage. So it extends beyond the Great British sort of Great Britain SPBP. Northern Ireland is extended more. There was an announcement almost within weeks of that was going to apply to the UK at some point, but I've not heard anything since.
Well, before I know this could turn into a big speaking topic. A really good point. Maybe we'll come into another PQT to get if it does get impacts in the UK. But what I wanted to make clear is I'm hoping that all of us panel members will get to meet each other at the CIPP awards conference coming up in October, and I highlight this because that takes place before our next PQT, which will be on Thursday, the 23rd of October. For anyone who's attended today, thank you for joining us, but please do come find us if you're coming to the CRPP annual event. Please do come and say hi, give us your thoughts on the show, any tips, any recommendations, any feedback, any things perhaps you're too scared to tell us in a live environment you want to tell us privately. That'd be very welcomed as well. But it'd be great to see a lot of familiar faces and names at that, what is the biggest payroll conference really in the UK, and it's really all about payroll. So I'll look forward to meeting many of you there. For you, everyone else who's interested in PQT, remember to sign up to the next one on Thursday, the 23rd of October. You can sign up at sdworx.co.uk/PQT. Just leaves me to say a huge thank you to Simon Parsons, Karen Thompson, Matthew Akrigg, and of course myself. I'm Nick David, been your host today, and I look forward to meeting you all, if not at the CRPP conference, then on the next PQT on the 23rd. Thank you, everybody.